All right. Good Monday morning to everyone. We're a little loud. It's another Monday. Just think, it's one more Monday closer to the end of the semester. That's what keeps me going. All right, so we have reminders, lab this week. We are doing calculations. So if you want to bring a laptop or a tablet to help you do the calculations in a spreadsheet program, you can. I know I'm planning to show you how to do it in Excel. Normally happens every year that somebody has a laptop or a tablet and we show how to use it. So yeah, if you want to bring one of those, that's fine. Or in our room we have those computers set up so we can work on those. The topic this week is the biodiversity calculation. So learning how to do Simpson's index, Shannon's index, evenness, maximum number of species, you can say, richness. Those are all measures that we'll learn how to calculate. We'll talk about what it means, and then next week we have some sample, imaginary habitats that kind of gets you a comparison of distributions of species that leads you to then that question of which one is better, which index is better. All right, so this week's calculations. This week is not on the exam. All right, this will be on the next round of exams. Exam on Friday, so it'll just be all online on Blackboard. It'll go live sometime in the morning. It'll close by 11:30 in the evening. So once you start it, you have a time limit set. So make sure when you start it, you have some pretty good internet, pretty good power situation. I don't think we're going to have storms. At least storms are not in the forecast. So what's that? Yeah, right. I need it. So yeah, we'll get that done. Definitely, you will not have enough time to look up every answer. So you should be studying. You should be getting through there. It'll be tight on time, definitely. There is going to be a word list. So that word list will go live, and I mean, you could put it together yourself if you wanted to. It's just kind of all of our definitions that we've covered. So I did take out some definitions. Some definitions could be used, or I should say, some definitions could apply to a couple different words. So like evolutionary fitness, relative fitness, they all kind of mean the same thing. So I could see how you could answer the same, definition with either of those three words. Well, the word list is only going to have one of those on there. So you'll see. You could already put it together. All right, that'll be on Friday. I'll come up here on Friday. If you want to take it, you can take it here in the classroom. But if I come up here and I'm going to wait, 5 or 10 minutes and no one's here, I'm probably just going to head back down to my office. So, yep, question. Is it all multiple choice? Not really. No, so the definition is fill in the blank. That's why I have the word list. And that means that when you get your score, it may not be the final score. I'm going to go back and check the answers that were given for all of those fill in the blanks. Same thing with like the Hardy-Weinberg or any of the other quizzes that we've had that has had some fill in the blanks. I'll go back and check them, check for spelling, just because the way it gets auto-graded, and then correct it from there. There is multiple answer. So yeah, it's like the quizzes. So you can choose. There's at least one correct answer that you have to mark, but you could choose up to all of them, up to all 4 of them. All right. It is partial credit. You do get partial credit. So if you're supposed to mark 3 of them and you only marked 1, you'll get credit for marking part of that one. So partial credit for that. but also you'll lose points for guessing. Because the way it's set up is if you award partial credit and you're supposed to put 2, apparently if you selected all 4, you would get full credit for that answer. So, instead of doing all or none type of approach, I go that route of partial credit. So if you don't quite know, if you don't remember the question, if you don't remember the material, it doesn't hurt you to guess 1, all right, and go for at least partial credit. But if you know for a fact that one of those answers is correct and you're unsure about another one, don't guess on that other one. Just get your partial credit. Don't lose points by guessing incorrectly for that one that you were unsure on. All right, so I'm going to say that again. When it comes to guessing, because this is something that I see and that people just don't get it, that if you read the question and don't know any of the answers, it's okay to guess one answer. It's okay to do that. But on the answers, if you know that one of the answers is for sure the correct selection and you mark it, don't guess with the other remaining 3 answers. All right? Don't guess with the remaining 3. It's a harder type of question. It's kind of like the multiple choice where it has both A and B, both C or D, all of the above, none of the above. But the issues with those is if you could eliminate one of the answers, then you basically can eliminate 2 or 3 choices, which is a good way to learn how to take standardized tests. It really is. All right. And there may be true-false. So there may be a couple true-false that I slip in there. And those normally come about because I'll have a hard time putting that type of content in a multiple answer type format. So I'll just have a true-false question. There won't be short answer or essays on there. All right. Other questions? All right. So we left off. So we're talking about the thermal environment. This is going to be the last part of the material before we finish for the exam. All right. So we introduced our adaptations. So we had the law of tolerance. When our organism ends up entering a stress zone, then the organism should try to find a better place or evolve adaptation that allows it to do better because it always wants to be in the optimal zone. Why does it want to be in the optimal zone? Because that's the zone where it utilizes normally the less energy to survive. All right? So less energy spent towards survival means more energy available for reproduction. All right? So we talked about strategies when you end up in these stress zones or in these intolerant zones, and that the first one was avoidance. Move, get to a different area. All right, so avoidance could also be setting up diapause, developmental arrest. All right, and now what we're talking about is more full-on adaptations, all right, physiological adaptations. So we started with adaptations to the thermal environment. We introduced the effect of high temperatures and low temperatures on the biochemistry of our organisms. And then before we get to our adaptations, we have to understand how heat is gained or lost by the organism. All right, so we have a bunch of definitions here where we introduced, heat, just, this thermal energy that can be transferred. All right, conduction is the transference of heat between 2 bodies in contact. So, body to body, you're going to get heat transfer. Convection, you're transferring heat from a body to a moving fluid of some sort, and that could be air. All right, so fluid or gas. And it goes the other way too. So a fluid or gas could transfer heat to the body itself. We have radiation, where you have the transfer of heat, but you're actually not in contact. And we said that's, if you get your hands close together, or you go close together with other things, sometimes you feel the heat radiating off of that object. That's radiation. All right, and the ability to radiate is this emissivity. The ability to absorb that heat is absorptivity, and we'll talk a little about those. And then our last term was evaporative cooling, which means we're losing heat. All right, we're not going to gain heat from this method. We're going to lose heat by evaporating fluid. All right, and usually for organisms, it's going to be water, but in real life, like in regular applications, industrial applications, we could use other fluids. All right, we can utilize that, but in bodies and living organisms, it's typically water. Now, we said evaporative cooling is going to cost us energy. We asked why, and it's because we're going to have to set up some sort of gradient to get the water to flow down its own gradient. So we're going to utilize osmosis, the movement of water, for this evaporative cooling. We also have the possibility of exerting energy for muscle movements, so painting of dogs. All right, you had muscle movements to get the airflow across their throat that is filled with capillaries. All right, and we left off here after the definitions. We said our organism has this total heat content, and that's our heat content where our organism wants to be. It has a range of values that it wants to maintain. And then it's out in the world, it's out in the environment, and it's being exposed to all these different environments that cause heat to transfer to it, or heat to be transferred from the organism. So, what does the organism do? Well, it's going to adjust conduction, convection, radiation, evaporative cooling, and all this other stuff. All right? So our equation is this. Our total heat is determined by all of these things. Now, we've mentioned Hc, that's our conduction. Hcv, that's our convection. Hr, that's our radiation. He, that's our evaporative cooling. All right, but we have two other terms. Hm, that is metabolic heat production. All right, that is just simple things of generating energy, generating ATP, breaking down sugars to make energy. All right, breaking down our food source. We make heat. Why do we make heat during those processes? Okay, yeah, so you break bonds, you produce energy, but why heat? What's that? Yeah. All right, so yeah, we can talk about transfer of energy, right? And those processes aren't 100%. So even though you take a sugar molecule and we should be producing, you know, what's the count? 32 to 36 ATP. Is that our total estimate for a molecule of glucose? Right? Even though we should be producing those, all right, there's other energy that's available in that molecule that gets lost as heat. All right, because our energy transfers are not 100% efficient. All right, so that's where that heat comes from. And you'll notice that it's always positive. I don't have a plus or minus sign here. It's always positive. So just is surviving, just existing. If our body is working, we are generating heat. Conduction, convection, and radiation all have this plus or minus to it. So these are all aspects where our body can gain or lose heat. Evaporative cooling is a negative. It's never gaining heat. Evaporative cooling is always going to lose heat for the organism. It's always going to reduce the total heat content. And then we have this last term that's a plus or minus, this HS. This is heat storage. All right? This is heat storage. You can think of it as wiggle room. All right? It's a wiggle room. It's this heat that an organism can absorb, and they basically deal with all of this excess heat until they get to the time where they can lose it. All right? So they operate normally. They're just absorbing this heat, getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And then once they can, they dump the heat someplace else. All right? Some desert rodents utilize this. So instead of trying to alter all of these other forms of heat transfer, they utilize this heat storage. And you can track it. Their body temperature goes up higher than normal, higher than what would be considered normal. All right? And that happens as they're out foraging, out in the sun, And then once they come back to their burrow, they basically undergo this period where they dump that heat back into the cool earth. All right? So our organism wants to maintain total heat balance within certain limits. All right? Basically wants to be a balance. And again, balance is in quotation marks because remember, that's one of those common themes. Equilibrium is kind of a touchy subject in ecology. What is equilibrium? What is balanced? All right? We want to be someplace within some range. So if our heat total ends up getting too high, our organism is going to respond in some way to reduce that total heat content. How? What is its response? What is it going to do in relation to this in relation to this equation? All right, sweating or panting. What term does that affect? Evaporative cooling. So you increase this term. So you start losing heat. What else could we do? Okay, so movement. So, all right, so what terms are those? Does that affect? So the answer was if you're an alligator and you're too hot, you just move into the water to cool off. What terms is that going to affect here? What's that? Convection. Yep, convection. So we're going to transfer our heat to the water. What else could it do? What about radiation? So if they were out basking, now they've moved to a different area, you've altered the radiative absorption that it's getting. So, you know, all of these things. And we could do the flip side. So if our total heat content is too low, what are we going to do? The organism is going to do something that's going to alter how much heat it's going to start absorbing. So it may increase metabolic heat production. All right? It's going to decrease evaporative cooling, maybe not even utilize evaporative cooling anymore. All right? It's going to do all of these things on this side of the equation, this right-hand side of the equation, to get this H total back within its limits. All right? So, key points for this equation. Metabolism always adds heat. Always. All right? Always. Question. You eat a big meal, you feel cold. Why? Core temperature rises, but sacrifices it at extremities. Partial credit for that. I think we're probably heading down the right path. Say what? Ooh, I haven't heard that before. I'll have to think about that one. If you're producing more heat, you are producing more heat through metabolism. How much more? I don't know, probably not a huge amount. But I think we're going to get back to the extremities. So when you eat, your body alters its blood flow to send more flow down to the gut, to your intestines, so that you can absorb all of the nutrients that you just consumed. All right, and that comes at a cost of restricting blood flow to your extremities. So you feel colder. So next time someone says, "Oh, I'm cold, I need to warm up," just remember, metabolism always adds heat. All right, it'll go back to normal. All right. Key point number 2: heat always transfers from high heat to low heat, and this is, you should know this. All right, diffusion, right? High concentrations to low concentration. Osmosis, high amounts of water to low amounts of water. All right. High elevation lake, waterfall flows down from high to low. All right, it's just a rule for us. All right, heats always will go from a high heat to a low heat. It never goes from cold, like the cold is never going to transfer the cold to the heat. It's always the heat that transfers, because the heat is that thermal energy. All right, Key point number 3, the magnitude or the rate of our heat transfer depends on the temperature differences between our bodies or the body and the fluid and so forth, all right? So the larger the difference, the faster the rate of heat transfer. And then as you get closer and closer and closer to the same amount of transfer, you get less and less heat being transferred, or at least the rate of transfer is going to be much, much, much slower, all right? Real life example, I brewed beer yesterday, all right? I have to go from boiling down to regular like fermentation temperatures as quickly as you can, all right? Couple reasons. One reason, minimizes exposure to wild yeast, to wild bacteria. I want to try to get it as cold as possible so I can dump in my yeast and then introduce, hopefully give them the competitive edge, all right? But number 2, the faster you can get down, you initiate protein precipitation so you get a clearer beer, all right? So how do we do that? Well, you pump water through a chiller, through a copper coil in the wort. And initially, we start out at about 210 degrees. I know boiling's at 212, but we're at elevation, so actual boil temperature here is a little more than 210. So we're at 210, and in that first 5 minutes, I can go from about 210 degrees down to like 160 really quickly, all right? And it's because the incoming water's only at 85 or 86 degrees at this point, but that's a huge temperature difference. So in five minutes, I drop, 40 degrees, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But then it takes me another 20 minutes to get down another 40 degrees because now our temperature difference between that incoming water and that wort is much, much closer. So same thing applies for the organisms. The larger the difference, the faster the rate of transfer. And then our last point here, last take-home point, evaporative cooling is the only way to cool a body down if the environmental temperature is higher than that body. All right? So you can write it down, you can think about it. Think about what this phrase means. All right? This doesn't say this is the only way to cool a body down. That's only part of it. All right? There's many ways to cool a body down. But evaporative cooling is the only way to cool down if we're in an environment that is hotter than our own body temperature. All right? So right now, in this room, temperature is probably in the 70s, mid-70s. All right? I can cool down just by raising up my arms. I'm increasing my surface area. All right? I can also cool down if I'm sweating. But 2 weeks ago, if we went outside at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in the sun and stood in the sun and I raised my arms, I'm not cooling off. All right? I'm actually heating up. Why? It's because the outside temperature was hotter than my body. All right? Heat always transfers from high heat to low heat. So I'm always absorbing energy from the environment itself. And that means if my body is trying to cool down, the only way to cool down then is through evaporative cooling. All right? That's going to cost me water, and it's going to cost me energy. All right? Questions? All right, so let's talk about animal adaptations. All right? We're going to start with our homeotherms. So homeotherms are going to expend energy to regulate our temperature. All right, and that's what this graph is showing. So this graph shows our basal metabolic rate. That's basically the energy of a body at rest. That's how much energy our body just expends just sitting there, doing nothing. All right, and then we're showing the basal metabolic rate as a function of our ambient temperature, T sub A. So this is environmental temperature. And what you can see is that we have this zone here, this thermal neutral zone, where we don't expend any energy. We just have a base amount, basal metabolic rate, that keeps us within our normal temperature range. All right? So the thermal neutral zone is that range of environmental temperatures where no additional energy is required to maintain a constant body temperature. All right? That's just our baseline. If we go outside of that zone, So either cooler temperatures or higher temperatures. Now we expend more energy. We expend more energy to thermoregulate. All right? So, before we get to the why and how, or why we increase our energy, let's relate this graph to the law of tolerance. All right, we talked about the law of tolerance. So, where do you think our optimal zone is? So I know you're going to probably draw this. All right, so we have our thermal neutral zone. Let's get this zoomed in. What's that? It is. It is. Hopefully no one has, like motion sickness or anything like that. It's still kind of far back there. Hopefully they could see it. Oh, you know what? They can. Let's move this. All right. So we've got our basal metabolic rate. We have our ambient temperature thermal neutral zone. So where is our optimal zone? So what is our optimal zone?
The thermal neutral zone?
It is. So why do you say it's the thermal neutral zone?
We're not having to change our basal metabolic rate to
Yep, so it takes the least amount of energy for us to thermoregulate. All right? We're not expending energy to thermoregulate, which means our energy can be utilized for other purposes. Finding food, finding mates, and all that other stuff. All right? We're in our optimal zone. We're going to do our best in this range. All right? And in terms of our law of tolerance, we're looking at, that's our peak. That's where we're going to find most individuals of our species in that zone. All right? So that is in our thermal neutral zone. That's our optimal zone. What about our zones of stress? Where outside? How far? Just all the way? All right, so you say outside. I'm going to add this. Add some dashes here. All right, so this area here and this area here. These are the zones of stress. So we're outside the thermal neutral zone, so we have to expend energy to thermoregulate at that point. All right? We're in our area where our organism can survive. All right? But now it's investing more energy just to regulate its temperature. And that means it has less energy for other things in its life, for growing, for reproducing. All right? So our population size isn't going to be as high as population size at the optimal zone. And then what happens over at these areas? That's our zone of intolerance. Zone of intolerance. So notice I added a couple lines there. So at these points, our organism dies. Oops. Did you see it? I didn't even drop it. This is cheap chalk, I tell you what. I'd say where I think it's made, but YouTube might ban me, so I can't do that. See if there's more chalk around here. Oh yeah, there it is. Great. What's that? Oh. Yeah, so there is down in the computer lab, there's a box of chalk, and we've had it there since I've started, and it's been probably the best chalk that I've ever used. We're down to the last couple sticks, unfortunately. Oh, yeah, I can't do that. All right, so these are the spots where our organism dies. So when they die, the body temperature is just going to keep going up because, you know, the environment is hot. All right, so if this was 130 degrees and we go out and just died on the sidewalk, our body temperature is going to start taking on the temperature of the environment. All right, so that's what's going to happen. All right, and same thing down here. If it was freezing temperatures and we die, our body temperature start going to go down. It's going to start going down because we're dying. And at this point, you can say it's basically hypothermia sets in. All right. Here, heat stress sinks in, your heat stroke and stuff. So those are our zones of intolerance at those ends. So we're basically going to die. All right. If we don't get out, zone of stress, we can handle it. All right. But we're not going to be doing as well as if we were in ambient temperatures that allowed us to not expend any more energy to regulate our temperature. All right, questions? Right, zoom this back down. All right, so our questions. What causes the increases? And we'll start when we're cold. So we're cold. All right. We're cold because we're in this zone of stress here. We're expending more energy. So what causes that increase in our basal metabolic rate? Usually, it's going to be shivering. Shivering and movement. All right. So shivering is just rapid muscle contractions. Muscle contractions utilize energy. We're going to utilize the energy, all right, to move our muscles, but our energy transfers are inefficient. So some of that energy is released as heat. All right. Some cases, we know we're cold, so we just start moving around. We just start trying to become more active. Again, it's muscle movements. Muscle movements generate the heat. But we also have non-shivering thermogenesis that can happen. So non-shivering thermogenesis is defined as using brown fat to increase heat production by uncoupling fat metabolism from ATP synthesis. All right, so we've been talking about you use a glucose molecule and produces ATP. Well, we don't get all of the energy from that glucose because some of that is lost as heat. Well, it comes a time where we need to really generate some heat. So what we do is utilize fat metabolism. Now, under normal circumstances, fat would be broken down to produce ATP and heat. All right, that heat is through the inefficiency of our energy transfers. But now, instead of producing ATP, we basically stop that process. So we're breaking the fats down without making ATP, which means we are producing more heat. All right, who does this? What are example organisms that might do this? Any guesses? What's that? Can't humans do that? Yes, we can. Babies do this. All right? There's a reason babies come out fat and pudgy. All right? They do. They utilize non-shivering thermogenesis as part of their thermoregulation. Bats will do this. So bats will do this more on a more regular basis. So yeah, when they're in their nest and when they're roosting, they can let their body temperature start to drop. They don't enter like a full hibernation state, all right? But they let their body temperature drop, their heart rates drop, and then to bring up their core body temperature again to get back to being active, they can utilize this non-shivering thermogenesis. And then some rodents also do the same thing. All right? So for at least this increase in our basal metabolic rate, it's really tied to the movement, muscle movements or heat generation, thermogenesis. Now note we haven't talked about like changing surface areas yet. All right, this is just in relation to this increase in basal metabolic rate. What about lowering our body temperature when we're hot? What causes this increase? Well, we've already said, usually this is going to be restricted to evaporative cooling. All right, because normally when we get up to this point, our ambient temperature, so when we're up to this point, our ambient temperatures are going to be exceeding the body temperatures. So in order to bring our body temperature down, our organism utilizes evaporative cooling. What type of evaporative cooling just kind of depends on the organisms. All right, so some organisms are going to sweat. We sweat. All right. What's the cost? Well, we're going to pump salts out of the body to promote osmosis. All right. Pumping of the salts required energy. We're pumping the salts across their concentration gradient. All right. Salts want to move from high to low, just like any other things. But we're moving them across their concentration gradient, so we expend energy in order to do that. All right. And we also sacrifice water. Panting does the same, somewhat of the same thing. You have less focus on moving water across the surface because you are already using something that's naturally moist. All right, in dogs, their throat is naturally moist. All right, so they're not really increasing water movement at that point to promote the sweating. But they do have to increase air movements. All right, so they have to produce rapid air movements across that throat because it's filled with capillaries. And those capillaries are now going to allow the body to transfer the heat to that moist surface, which is then lost through the evaporation, through the vaporization of that fluid, of the water. So the rapid air movements themselves, require muscle movements, diaphragm movements. All right, that costs energy, and then you're losing water through the vaporization process. Birds have something similar called gullar fluttering. All right, this is rapid throat movement. Ooh, let me correct that. Rapid throat movement. That's better. So it's going to be a rapid throat movement to lose heat by evaporative cooling. You can think of it as kind of like panting, all right? But they're not panting, they're gullar fluttering. All right? They're producing this rapid movement, again, to get air movement across a moist surface to cool them off. Questions? All right, so those are the things that require energy. Other adaptations and responses, they don't require energy. All right, so our basal metabolic rate doesn't change. We don't see it change. All right, so what are some of these adaptations? Well, insulation. Great example, insulation. So when we talk about insulation, we're talking about furs and feathers, or hair. All right? Hair, fur, or feathers. All right, how does that influence our organism? What can the organism do with these furs and feathers that either increase or decrease our heat gain, heat retention or loss? What can we do? Anything. Yeah. Okay, so when it gets colder, dogs have thicker coats. Exactly. All right. Pay attention to, so this winter, pay attention to some of the birds outside, some of the songbirds. All right. And on those cold days, you're going to see them. They look round and pudgy. What did they do? They cause their feathers to fluff out. All right. Why? They're trapping more air. They're trying to retain the heat that they have in their body. All right. So thickness of fur, how thick a coat it is, that insulation layer, All right, all of those things are aimed at usually preventing heat loss. So preventing heat loss through what process? Conduction, convection, radiation? What do you think? Yep, blubber is also insulation. So fats would also be insulation, but yeah, it could also be energy, but yeah, insulation. So if we have, fur or feathers, doesn't cost energy, but how does that influence our heat balance equation? Which one? Convection? Conduction. Convection? Convection, right? So conduction is the bodies in contact. So what they're doing here with the insulation is setting up that layer, so the cold layer has to go through a stationary air layer. So vacuum cups, right? Vacuum cups got layer of, very little air between the two interior and the exterior surface. That acts as insulation. That minimizes our convective heat loss. Size and shape also can affect our heat balance equation. So important here, surface area to volume ratios. And I already mentioned it, right? Raising up your arm, you've increased your surface areas. You bring your arms down, you have them to your sides, you've reduced your surface areas. You probably realize when you're cold, you kind of curl up in a ball. Why? Surface area to volume ratios. Surface area to volume ratios. All right? The more surface area we have relative to our volume, the more likely we are to lose or gain heat from convective processes. Same thing applies with conduction. So the larger the surface area we have on that object, the more we're going to gain or lose heat to that object. All right. Morphology, appendages, all right, could be used for heat balance. All right. Elephants are a great example. They've got the big floppy ears. All right. Those ears have a lot of blood flow going through them. It helps them. Here's this organism that has a huge volume. It's generating a lot of heat. All right. If it didn't have these ears, what would happen to that elephant? It's what? It would overheat. Yeah, basically cook itself. All right, so the ears are appendages that have a lot of capillaries in them that allow it to dump the heat back out to the environment. We had mentioned blubber. So have you ever watched any of those Discovery Channel shows on like whale hunting? Like the Inuit are able to do that. What do they do when they get a whale? What's that? They harpoon it. After they harpoon it, they have it now. They've got it onto the boat, and they're tying it up to the boats because they're going to take it to shore. What do? They cut off chunks of blubber. Why? That blubber is such a good insulator that they cut those holes so that it can cool down, because the heat that's in that organism itself would cause the meat to spoil. I'd say cooks it from the inside out, but that's a little exaggeration, just like this slide here. All right, behavior. That's another one. So relocate during, and I say I'm going to put this relocate during normal movement patterns. Yep.
I was wondering, is that why whales expand whenever they're beached? Because sometimes I know they explode for some reason.
That is bacteria in the gut.
I was wondering, is that why?
Bacteria in the gut, bacteria in the body, yeah. That's why they expand. All right, so with the behavior, yeah, we can also alter our heat balance equation. Now, remember, we're not changing our basal metabolic rate, so this will just be a normal movement. Organism goes out during normal activity to go out forage, all right, and as they come back, instead of sitting outside their den, they go back inside their den. They go to the shade, all right. So it's not really, expending energy to do this. They were already moving. They were already, relocating. But at this point, it can alter our conduction, convection, radiative heat gains, and losses and so forth. So I do put that this is an avoidance strategy. So, and it's I include it here because it is part of our heat balance equation, but this is an avoidance strategy, not necessarily a physiological adaptation. And then light versus dark, coloration, all right? And this is going to affect our emissivity and our absorptivity. Really, it's our absorptivity, all right? If we're going to be in a hot environment that has a lot of sunlight, we probably don't want to be a dark color. We're going to absorb too much heat. But if you're trying to absorb a lot of heat, maybe then you do want to be in a dark color. So you can look at things like polar bears, all right? Their fur is, what color is their fur? White, translucent, all right? What color is their skin? It's black. Why is that? Absorptivity, all right? The sun, they're trying to absorb the heat. All right, questions? All right, we're going to stop here. We're going to finish up our animal adaptations and then go to plant adaptations. We will finish this up on Wednesday, probably not even take the entire lecture. All right, so start reviewing. All of the quizzes should be accessible, so after the due date, just go into your grades, click on your score. That should open up the quizzes. If you have a question about, you think one was supposed to be correct, and you're not sure why, check your notes, and if you still can't find it, then you go ahead and email me. I'll help you out. All right. Have a good rest of Monday.